which is probably familiar to some of you. It says, but many who are first will be last, and the last will be first. Then it moves directly into chapter 20. And I just want to remind you that these chapter markers are false distinctions, right? Jesus didn't take a break, go somewhere else, and start a new teaching. It moves from Jesus' conversation flows directly from 19 into 20. And in some ways, that chapter marker is really unhelpful because it separates the parable that Jesus tells at the beginning of chapter 20 from what Jesus has just said about the last being first and the first being last. So that's the context for Matthew 20 and this parable that takes up the first 16 verses. So I thought what we would do is we'll just make our way through the parable, and we'll kind of talk through some of the interesting pieces that stand out. And I think this is a unique opportunity because you've got three pretty different guys looking at the same passage, and I think we may have some different takes on what's going on, and that to me is just good, clean fun. So we'll take it from there. I'll read a few verses at a time, and then we'll pause for comment, and then we've got some questions for you at the end. So here's how the parable begins. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire laborers for his vineyard. And after agreeing with the laborers for the usual daily wage, he sent them into his vineyard. So it feels like a pretty mundane start. There's a couple features of that might not be so familiar to us. One, this is a picture out of daily life, right? And really, it's not just a picture of daily life 2,000 years ago. There's some ways in which this is still a picture of daily life, right? I don't know Dunwoody well enough to know yet, but in Tyler, there was an area where the day laborers would gather, right? Folks who were looking for a daily job, and they would go to this place. You'd pull up in your truck, and you'd say, "Hey, I need 4 guys for 4 hours." Is that an area? Is there an area like that here? I assume there is, right? So, that's a pretty common human setup for a parable. You've got a wealthy landowner who's trying to find some day laborers. The piece that is maybe less familiar for us is that Jesus is setting up an image that's pretty familiar to first century Jews, really pretty familiar to Jews throughout history. And it's the image of a vineyard and a landowner who owns a vineyard. This is an image that from Old Testament to New Testament is used to represent God and Israel. Multiple times, both in Jesus' ministry and in the Old Testament, God is represented as the owner of a vineyard, and Israel is represented as the vineyard. And Israel's job is to produce fruit. God has set up the vineyard to produce fruit. In the Old Testament, what we hear over and over again is that the vineyard fails to produce fruit. In the New Testament, we hear Jesus twist that image so that the vineyard isn't Israel. Well, I don't want to go into it, but it's good. Go read John 15. So that's the setup. And I want you to have that image in the back of your mind as we begin the parable, because already in the first verse, we know who this parable is about. We already know that this parable is about God and Israel. It's about God and God's people. We pause there. Guys, anything that stands out to y'all in the first couple verses? Okay. David?
Only thing I think is here is pay attention as we go through the rest of this story, in that what has been agreed upon by the vineyard keeper and those who are going to work. They agree on a wage, which is a daily wage. And listen what happens as we go through the rest of this.
Oh, I'm glad you said that, David. I forgot about that. So the daily wage is called a denarius. It's just the standard agreement. This is how much you get for working a day's work. David's exactly right. You got to pay real close attention, because what happens with that daily wage is unexpected. All right, so
I guess the only thing I would say is the bookends. The first to be last and the last to be first. It always bugs me when a church calls themselves First United Methodist. I'm glad we're not Dunwoody First, because why would you want to then be last? I mean, if you were like First Methodist, Jesus says that's dangerous, because the first will be last. So I'm glad we're not Dunwoody First.
Maybe we should be Dunwoody last.
I think Dunwoody last to be much better.
Okay.
Yes. Y'all do it.
A name change feels like the right thing right now.
Yes. Yeah. Double last.
Okay. All right. Good. Good. All right. Verse 3. When he went out about 9 o'clock, so keep in mind that your workday is split up into kind of quarters. Workday would start about 6 a.m. So 6 a.m., 9 a.m., noon, 3. The workday would end around 6 p.m. That'll be important. So he's going out about 3 hours later. He said he went out about 9 o'clock. He saw others standing idle in the marketplace. And he said to them, the landowner says to them, "You also go into the vineyard, and I'll pay you whatever is right or just." Right? He doesn't name the price. He doesn't name denarius. He doesn't name a daily wage. He says, "I'll pay you whatever is right." And they trust him, and so they go. So they went out. This is verse 5. When he went out, he did the same thing. So this landowner he keeps going back to the well. Right? He goes first day, sends laborers into the vineyard. He goes back out at night. One of the interesting questions for me that's kind of left unanswered to a degree in the parable. Why does he go back out at 9? Why does he go back out at noon? And why does he go back out at 3? But for whatever reason, he goes back and he keeps bringing more people to his vineyard. There is so much work to be done at his vineyard. And he apparently has plenty of funds to pay them that he keeps going back and bringing more, never committing really to an exact pay scale. And that, as you'll see at the end of the parable, is really important. We pause there real quick. Anything that stands out before we press on?
Well, I think the reason he keeps going back out is because the harvest is bountiful. The harvest may be more than what he anticipated. And so he has the laborers go out first, and it's good. It's not going to get me done today. So I need more folks. The harvest is there, and the harvest continues to be there.
Yeah, you're giving away the punchline, David. Way to go.
I just have to say, this is the parable that helped me quit my PhD program. Seriously.
Okay.
I went and I was assigned a paper on wage fairness. And I was reading, it was part of an HR class that I was taking. And I read this huge paper with all these statistics. And I finally went to the guy and I said, "I know this story. It's in the Bible. It's already true, and it doesn't need your statistics to try and back it up. I just can't do this anymore."
Well, now you're giving away the punchline. You're submarining the whole thing. Just be calm. Be calm. We're not there yet. Okay. We'll come back to that because that is incredibly important. Hang on. Just hang on. Okay. So we've made it all the way through the day. We've gone out at 3 o'clock. That's for the last quarter of the day. That should be the last time the vineyard owner goes out. But in verse 6, at about 5 o'clock, he went out and found others standing around, and he said to them, "Why are you standing here idle all day?" And they said to him, "Because no one has hired us." And so the landowner says to these workers, "You also go into the vineyard," which makes absolutely no sense. It's 5 o'clock. His vineyard is some distance away. We don't know exactly, but let's say it's a 15-minute walk from the town center. So now they've got 45 minutes to work. What really are you going to do in the last 45 minutes of the day? He doesn't even commit to pay them, so they don't know that they're going to get paid. What are they even still doing there? Right? Put yourself in their position. You are a day laborer. Your livelihood is dependent on somebody showing up and giving you a job. When you come home at night, if you didn't have a job that day, your family didn't eat. You stood now on the street corner for 11 hours, and plenty of people have gotten a job, but you're still there. You know you're about to have to go home to your family. Well, all right.
The power's still on. That's
Y'all
just
good to
the lights just changed. We have them on a timer, and we need to move that timer.
Okay.
Cloudy day.
We can still hear you. All right, you can still hear. So, anyways, all that to say, imagine the humiliation of these workers who stood out there all day, being passed by all day. This landowner shows up and says, "What are you still doing here?" And they say, "No one has hired us yet." right? That's the sense. No, like it hasn't happened yet, but we're willing. We're willing to work, but nobody's hired us yet. It's a curious ending to the day. Well, it's not quite the end, but it piques our interest to think, what was the point of that? Why did he hire somebody at the very end of the day? All right, anything before I press on? Nope.
I'm not going to say a word.
Well, don't ruin it. Thank you. Gracious. All right, I'm trying to find my place in the dark here. When evening came, so the workday's over. When evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his manager, which who is that guy? Where has he been? Shouldn't he have been hiring the guys all day? Like, what's the landowner? What's the guy in charge doing? Traipsing out to the marketplace all day. Whatever. He calls his manager over. Says, call the laborers and give them their pay, beginning with the last, and then going to the first. And that's when you know it's about to hit the fan, right? Now you can start to see, well, that's a dumb idea. Because if you start with the last, then you're going to create an expectation for the first. So here's why it creates an expectation. When those he hired about 5 o'clock came, each of them received the usual daily wage. So they worked 45 minutes tops, and they got paid for the whole day. So if you're the first worker, what are you thinking? You see the last worker get paid what you were going to get paid. What are you thinking? You're thinking, okay, bonus. Okay, that doesn't look too bad. I like where this is headed. Now, when the first came, they thought they would receive more, but each of them also received the usual daily wage. And this is where it just falls apart. It absolutely falls apart because our sense of equality and fairness and justice is blown up. Right? What should have happened, you and I know it, they worked longer, they worked harder, they worked better. What should have happened is they should have gotten paid for 2 days, or maybe 3 days. Or if the last workers worked 1/12 of the time that the first workers worked, they should have gotten paid 12 times the usual daily wage. So they get paid the same thing. Thanks, Bill. This is helpful. All right. And when they received it, they grumbled. Which, by the way, that word grumbled is used to describe Israel over and over and over again. Think about Israel in the wilderness right after the parting of the Red Sea. They get into the wilderness and they get hungry. So what do? They grumble. And they assume that God isn't going to feed them. They want to go back to slavery, and so they grumble. So here again, we're hearing a story that goes deep into our history. So they grumble against the landowner, saying, these last worked only an hour, and you have made them equal to us. And I love that. That's the crux of the matter. They're not equal to me. I'm better than them. I worked harder than they did. They aren't equal to me. How could you make them equal to me? That to me is the heart of the problem with this parable. You made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the day and the scorching heat. All right, before we hear the landowner's response, let me pause real quick. What stands out to you guys as we get down to the climax of the story?
The thing I appreciate about the way that you set it up is just the anticipation of the people who got started earlier. I hadn't really felt that before. I know I've read it 100 times, but I hadn't really felt that as much before as when you put it together, that those people who were hired first, there's a level of expectation that is there that I hadn't really thought through before. So thank you.
Good. Thanks, Phil. David?
Yes.
Okay, good.
You know, it is interesting though. We in life, I used to run into this in my own family of getting what we used to call allowances, and there were certain jobs that received remuneration, and there were other jobs that did not receive it, and you always wondered which was which. And my dad's comment was often is you shouldn't get paid for something that is your responsibility with that. And so to have the expectation not only that we would get paid, but we would get paid more for something that we are expected to do We had a workman at our house not too long ago, and at the end of the day, I paid them what we had agreed upon, and he just stood there. And it was like, well, where's the tip? And I was going, oh, okay. And so I gave him a little something more than that. I basically dinner money with that, which I'm not sure if he was pleased with or not. But, we had agreed on what the job was going to be. But yet there was still that expectation, not only will you pay me what we've agreed upon, but there should be something more just because that's the way we do things.
I think the interesting thing here for me is this isn't the complaint of the unjustly paid. Right? Remember that the first workers were promised a just wage, and it was the daily wage. They were promised a denarius. That is everything they could have hoped for when they went out that morning. Their family's ability to eat that night depended on them earning the daily wage, which is exactly what they got. So this isn't the complaint of somebody who has been unjustly paid. This is the complaint of somebody who has been justly paid, but cannot abide by somebody else receiving more than what they thought they earned. So I think that's an important piece to keep in mind. And in fact, that's exactly where the landowner is going to go when he responds. So listen to the landowner. And who is the landowner again? God. God is the landowner. Listen carefully. He says, this is in verse 13 if you're following along. They replied to one of them, friend, which I like that. I like that because this is that word friend. It's not the word that we would typically translate friend. It's more akin to, hey, you who are doing the shouting. That's the sense of the word there. You who's talking so loud, friend, I'm doing you no wrong, right? I'm doing you no wrong. Didn't you agree with me for the usual daily wage? He reminds them, you've been paid justly, and you earned what you have been paid. You have been paid justly. Take what belongs to you and go. And now things get interesting. I choose to give to this last the same as I give to you. Am I not allowed to do what I choose with what belongs to me? Or are you envious because I am generous? So the last will be first, and the first will be last. And now we have the same statement. Now we've wrapped it up, right? We've bookended our story, which is why the end of chapter 19 really belongs with all the material. The chapter break should have happened after verse 16. So a couple of things that I want to point out. God says, look, I haven't been unjust to you at all. What I'm giving, this money that belongs to me, I'm freely willing and able to do with it as I please. It's not your job. This is what I love. God says, it's not your job to decide what I do with what belongs to me. This is my job. And I'm going to give it freely and willingly to whomever I want to give it to. And then he turns the screw a little bit, which we're uncomfortable with this as an image of God, but he turns the screw a little bit. He says, are you envious because I'm generous? And the Greek there is a little tricky. It says, is your eye evil because I'm generous? So we've translated that, are you envious? Because the evil eye in the ancient world is one that looks at something else and covets it. Right? It's one that the lens through which you see the world is the lens of self-centeredness, that everything belongs to and revolves around you. That's the evil eye. Is your eye evil because I'm generous? So, let me pause there. I don't have a clue what time it is. What time are we?
Almost.
Okay, so we're almost to where we need to break into groups. Let me pause there. So now that time that y'all try to ruin this by giving the punchline first. So bring that back, Phil. As you thought about equal pay and you had read this story, what's the payoff for you?
The payoff is that everyone gets included at the same level, whether you're late to the party, whether you're late to the story, whether you grew up and followed all the Jewish laws your whole life, or you're a Gentile who's just heard the story a day ago. you get welcomed in the same way someone who's been faithful and circumcised is welcome.
Yeah, I think that's right on the money. Part of the setup in 19, if you go back and read it, which again, I hope you will, because it's really important and it's really interesting. But part of the setup is this conversation happens in the wake of a conflict with the Pharisees. And that's still very much the setting. And the Pharisees are the guys who have been working all day. The Pharisees are the ones who know all the rules. They've been living by all the rules. And suddenly Jesus shows up and he dares to give a rip about people who have been waiting for a job all day. He dares to give a rip about the people who have been left on the street corner and forgotten, the people who have been left to starve and their families to starve. Jesus dares to care about those guys. And the Pharisees show up and say, that doesn't belong to them. They don't deserve to eat. They don't deserve what the landowner is giving them. We deserve it. So I think that's
we've earned it. We've earned it.
Oh, that's good. Yeah, we've earned it. And what do we know about grace? It is anything but earned. It is not, grace is not a thing that's earned. It is what is given freely and willingly. David, what stands out to you? What stands out to you?
Give us this day our daily bread. And Jesus taught that we would remember that every day, and that God provides. From the stories in the Old Testament of God providing the manna for all those that needed it. But that's what the promise is. Give us this day our daily bread. And the landowner is very much true to that.
It reminds me of the customer service technique. I don't know if you know this one, but if somebody comes and yells at you and you're in retail, if you will just take it for a minute and then say to them, you got something in your teeth. They will be so out of sorts that they'll fluster. They won't even know what to say because they've come and they're so angry, but then they become self-conscious. And I feel like that's what that friend statement does. It's like, friend. And then you're taken aback and all that bluster goes away.
Yeah. There's more, as y'all can see, there's more meat on these bones. There's more to explore, and I hope you'll have a chance to do that in your group. The first question that I'm going to have you talk about is, for what is your eye evil? Part of this parable is about not being able to celebrate the blessings of the people around us, not being able to celebrate the grace that other people have received. What is that lens, that warped lens through which we're looking? Or what are we looking at and not celebrating? That's part of what the parable is about. And part of the parable is, frankly, amazing grace. Right? The last workers in particular did not deserve it, did not earn it, and yet were given it. I think there's plenty of opportunity for reflection about our own life and about how we see the people around us who are still on the street corner, who have been left on the street corner because nobody wants them. Nobody's pulling them back to the vineyard, but where is God in the story? Constantly going back there to bring more people to the vineyard so that they and their families can eat. So, Andy Mark. I think we're ready to split into groups.